Archaeologists have begun a new large-scale excavation in Pompeii, the Roman city destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago. Archaeological work often unearths the wonders of past civilizations, but beneath these ruins also lie tales of heartache and sorrow. Some discoveries reveal not treasures, but tragedies, lost lives, forgotten civilizations, and dark moments frozen in time. These poignant finds remind us of the fragility of life. Here are the saddest things discovered by archaeologists. The sewer of babies. Sometimes we find the most gruesome secrets buried in the most unexpected places. Archaeologists in Ashkelon, Israel, probably weren't expecting much excitement when they began excavating an ancient Roman sewer beneath a bathhouse. But what they sifted from the muck was anything but ordinary. Hundreds of tiny bones began to appear in the mud, and they soon realized they were standing in something far more horrific than an old sewer. The bones belonged to nearly 100 newborn babies, hidden beneath the city in this ancient Roman sewer. As the team got over their shock, the grim reality began to take shape. At first, they suspected the sewer was used to dispose of baby girls, reflecting the low value placed on females at the time. But analysis quickly proved otherwise. Most of the tiny bones belonged to males, the prized demographic of Roman society. This left researchers wondering why anyone would dispose of baby boys in such a manner. One theory suggests the bathhouse above wasn't just a place of leisure, but one that included darker activities, possibly even prostitution. The disturbing idea is that unwanted pregnancies resulting from such activities led to these babies literally being thrown down the drain. Despite the shock of this discovery, the true reasons behind this tragic burial remain shrouded in mystery to this day. But just when you think it couldn't get more disturbing, the next story brings even more horror. Buried alive. What if your final moments weren't meant to be your end? Few things are more terrifying than finding yourself trapped inside a coffin, plunged into darkness with no way out. That's precisely what researchers believe happened to a young woman in ancient China. Her final moments were anything but peaceful. Found with her body contorted and eyes wide with terror, this female mummy tells a chilling tale of being buried alive at just 25 years old. She had recently given birth, but complications arose when the placenta wasn't fully expelled. This led to severe internal bleeding, and unaware of this life-threatening condition, her family assumed she had died. In their haste to follow funeral traditions, they buried her in a coffin too small for her to sit up in. But tragically, she wasn't dead. She awoke to find herself trapped, her limbs contorted, unable to move or escape. What followed were desperate attempts to free herself. Scratches and fractures on her fingers and toes show how she clawed at the coffin and tore at the fabric lining within. The placenta eventually detached, worsening her situation. As she screamed and fought for survival, thick walls of the coffin muffled her cries, rendering her efforts unheard by anyone outside. Eventually, she succumbed to exhaustion, suffocation, and unimaginable pain. If you think being buried alive is tragic, wait till you hear the next discovery. Coffin birth. Death usually ends a story, but in this case, it was only the beginning. Imagine unearthing a grave and finding that a woman had given birth after she died. This is no medieval tale, but a real discovery made in the small town of Ema, Italy. Sometime in the 7th or 8th century, a pregnant woman tragically lost her life at 38 weeks pregnant, just 2 weeks before her due date. When archaeologists unearthed her grave in 2002, they found something they weren't expecting: tiny bones resting by her legs. These were the remains of her unborn child, who was delivered after her death in an event known as coffin birth. Scientifically known as post-mortem fetal extrusion, this phenomenon is incredibly rare. But what makes this discovery even more disturbing is the condition of the mother. Her skull had a small hole, suggesting she had undergone a primitive surgical procedure called trepanation. This surgery was performed in the Neolithic age to treat various conditions, including fevers and seizures. The woman likely died from the surgery or an illness that led to the procedure. Despite her tragic death, her body continued to react in the grave, and the child was delivered post-mortem. As if that wasn't disturbing enough, The next story is a devastating reminder of nature's power over life. Eruption victims. Some disasters leave behind more than just destruction. Sometimes they preserve disturbing stories. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, the city of Pompeii was buried under volcanic ash and debris, creating one of the most significant and tragic archaeological discoveries ever made. This ancient city, once bustling with life, was completely engulfed within hours by the volcano's sudden eruption. Over the years, many have tried to capture the horror of that fateful day through films, series, and novels. But nothing compares to what the actual excavations have revealed. One particularly heartbreaking find occurred in 2020 when archaeologists unearthed a villa just outside Pompeii. While it survived the first devastating eruption, it was obliterated the following day by a second blast. Inside this villa, two individuals were found, one a wealthy man, the other his slave. Both were frozen in time, their bodies exposed to the intense heat of thermal shock, their hands and feet clasped tightly together. The position of their bodies suggests they were seeking safety within the villa, likely believing that they had survived the worst, only to be overtaken by the second eruption. While this discovery is tragic, it's not unique. Pompeii has long been known as a graveyard for such disaster victims, their final moments preserved in ash for thousands of years. Some are found huddled together in homes, while others were discovered trying to flee, unaware their city would soon be wiped off the map. Even poets of the time, like Pliny the Younger, were impacted by the disaster, recounting the catastrophe in vivid detail. Leaving the ruins of Pompeii, we climb the mountains where a far more chilling discovery awaits. The children of Lulayaco. High in the unforgiving peaks of the Andes Mountains lay a chilling secret, hidden for centuries, waiting to be unearthed. Just below the icy summit, at an altitude of roughly 6,000 meters above sea level, archaeologists made a hair-raising discovery. Within a hidden burial chamber, they found 3 children eerily preserved by the frigid air. These were no ordinary burials, they were sacrifices. The children had been offered to the Inca gods in a ritual known as capacocha, a practice often performed during times of crisis or significant events to ensure the gods' favor. What makes this find so chilling is that these children were alive when they were placed on the mountain. The Incas, one of South America's most powerful empires, believed children were the purest offerings to appease their gods. They were drugged with coca leaves and alcohol to sedate them during this unimaginable fate. Archaeologists discovered traces of these substances in the children's bodies, explaining why they didn't resist their destiny. The eldest of the 3, known as La Doncella, or the Maiden, was around 15 years old. She was found sitting cross-legged, her head bowed as if in peaceful slumber. Beside her lay a 7-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, equally well-preserved, their small faces telling a silent story of a tragic end. The Incas performed these sacrifices not out of cruelty, but out of a belief that the children would continue to live as honored gods, their role to protect their people. Even the intricate details of the children's clothing are preserved well enough to remain intact. While these children met a sorrowful end, our next find reveals an equally surprising and grim demise. The bound mummy. Archaeologists have hailed the latest discovery in Peru as possibly the most exciting find of the decade. Sometimes a grave speaks louder than the life that came before. Archaeologists recently made a poignant and disturbing discovery in the heart of Peru. Buried deep within the earth, they unearthed a mummy dating back roughly 1,200 years. But it wasn't just its age that made this find distinct. It was the eeriness of how the body was positioned. The mummy's hands were covering its own face, a gesture that immediately raised questions about its death. Even stranger, the entire body was tightly bound with rope. This odd combination sparked countless theories. Was this person being punished, or was there a ritualistic reason for such a burial? And why would someone bound in this manner be found in a formal burial chamber? Some speculate it might have been a criminal, while others believe it could be part of a ritual to prevent the soul from returning. We may never know why this mummy was bound, but what's preserved in the bogs of Northern Europe will leave you disturbed. Bog bodies. The peat bogs of northern Europe hold more than just water. They hold dark secrets. It's unsettling to think how some violent practices have persisted throughout history, especially when the evidence is vividly preserved in these bogs. The discovery of ancient bodies known as bog bodies offers a chilling glimpse into a grim chapter of human history. A bog body is a human cadaver that has somehow been submerged in a peat bog. What makes this so unique is that these individuals, some over 2,000 years old, are almost perfectly preserved, as if frozen in time. But the reality of their deaths is anything but peaceful. The first major discovery came in 1950 in Denmark, when a woman cutting peat stumbled upon the remarkably lifelike remains of a man now known as Tolland Man. His body hair and even his facial expression were so well preserved that he appeared to have died recently. Arguably the most famous of all the bog bodies is Tolland Man, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that Tolland Man met a violent end. He was likely hanged as a ritual offering to the old gods, his body placed in the bog to appease divine powers. The tragedy deepens as we look at other bog bodies like Grauballe Man and Old Croghan Man, discovered in Ireland in 2003. These men suffered brutal deaths, beaten, mutilated, and bound before being left in the bog. Their throats were slit, and their bodies showed signs of extreme violence, pointing to possible punishments or ritual sacrifices. These ancient people didn't just die. They were offered in a way that reflects the deep spiritual beliefs of the time. What makes these discoveries even more disturbing is that the bogs, once sacred places, preserve these individuals so perfectly. And these are the only bodies in Europe where you have the whole body, the internal organs, and the brain. While their stories are incomplete, they continue to inspire both fascination and sorrow as they offer a window into a past where death, belief, and violence intertwined, sending chills down our spines even today. If the preserved remains of these bog men weren't disturbing enough, wait till you hear how fear drove people to extreme measures. The vampire grave. Finding the grave of a vampire is unusual. Fear of the unknown once drove people to extreme measures, and this discovery is one of them. For centuries, this deep-seated fear has influenced how we react to the unexplained. People were often labeled as witches or vampires, accused of monstrous acts based solely on superstition. A chilling example of this comes from Poland, where a woman was buried in a way that suggests she was believed to be a vampire. You're looking at the skeleton of a woman suspected of being a vampire in 17th century Poland. What's remarkable about her burial are the meticulous measures taken to ensure she remained in her grave. A sickle was placed over her neck to slit her throat if she tried to rise from the grave. But that wasn't enough for the fearful locals. They added a padlock to her grave, hoping to further trap her within the coffin. The padlock was used to prevent a deceased person, believed to be a vampire, from returning from the dead. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Such vampire burials were quite common when plagues or unknown diseases ravaged communities, and people desperately sought a scapegoat. In their fear, they turned to the idea of vampires lurking among them, causing death and destruction. Archaeologists have unearthed several vampire graves over the years, each with gruesome methods to prevent the undead from rising. In one instance, a body was discovered with a large rock forced into its mouth. The reason was quite simple. If the vampire awoke, it couldn't bite anyone with its mouth forced shut. While the days of accusing people of being vampires or witches are long gone, these dark chapters in history show how fear drove people to extremes. Today we accuse others of different things, but the results can be just as damaging. And sometimes the accusers are far more terrifying than the supposed monsters they try to stop. Following this horrifying burial, we now turn to another disturbing ritual. The Shimao sacrifice pits. Something far darker than previously imagined has been unearthed beneath the city of Shimao. Initially, it was thought that the ruins at Shimao, located near the Great Wall of China, were simply remnants of the ancient barrier. However, further excavations revealed a far more sinister discovery, a stepped pyramid at its center. Beneath this pyramid, archaeologists unearthed 6 pits filled with the skulls of 80 young girls, carefully arranged, not discarded, suggesting they were victims of ritual hand sacrifices. Human sacrifice wasn't uncommon in ancient China. In some instances, these sacrifices were offered to gods like Hebo, the river god, while in others, slaves or concubines were buried alongside their owners as part of funeral rites. What's disturbing about the Shimao discovery is that the reason behind these particular sacrifices remains unclear. The skulls of these young girls seem to be part of a larger grim ritual, perhaps part of the city's spiritual or political practices. As disturbing as the sacrificial pits of Shimao are, our next discovery reveals a brutal massacre in an unexpected place.